Hello, I'm back. So it must be Sunday. I hope everybody is happy and well. And today I've thought about this a lot, and I actually believe that this is my very earliest memory. So this would have taken place at the end of the Second World War. We still had our apartment, which my Hungarian grandparents had become very successful in Bremen, and they had 5 Victorian row houses, sort of a corner, and the one on the corner had this big restaurant in the bottom, and then the other 4 buildings, I think one had a bank in it, the other one had a cigar shop in it. Another one, excuse me, that was my dog, that was not me, had sort of a store where you could get anything if you were from a Slavic country that you might want to take with you on your way out, and the other one was a weapon store. And the weapon one, the Germans came at one point and confiscated all the weapons, because my grandfather had bought a lot of very beautiful weapons, plus a lot of them were very expensive, and so of course they took all of that. But anyway, my parents, when they got married, as a wedding present, got an apartment in Grandpa's buildings. So at that point, my French grandmother had already lost her house, so she was with my mom and I. And of course, it's the war, so every so often, and this is what I distinctly remember, is that the sirens would start in the middle of the night, and then I would say, oben, oben, which means, like upstairs, upstairs. And then we would have to run, and it was not on the ground floor, because that's where the businesses were. So we had to run down this very long staircase, because these apartments had like 14, 15-foot ceilings. So it was a very long staircase, and then at the bottom was this beautiful hallway, and there were these big glass double doors where the bottom was carved wood, and then most of it was glass. And my mother had told my grandmother that I always had to sleep in my clothes and my shoes on. And my grandmother would sneak in at night, and she would go, shh, 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 shh. And I would say, what are we doing? What are we doing? She said, oh, I take off your shoes. You can't sleep with your shoes. I take off your dress. Don't tell your mother. Shh, shh, shh. So that was our little routine. Well, so one night, as usual, the sirens went off, and it was always chaotic, and my grandmother would go, mon Dieu, mon Dieu. That's all she would say. My mother would say, oh, shut up, stop it, we've got to go. We would have to run down the staircase, cross the street, and go maybe 100 yards, and that's where the air raid shelter was. Well, going outside was, unbelievable. I mean, you could hear the bombs, as whee, and then bang. And it was light outside from all the bombs. It didn't seem like night light at all. And people would run and scream, and you would see women with their children, and they'd lose their children, and they'd say, come on, hurry up, hurry up. I mean, it was total chaos. I mean, it's war. This is not a tea party. And part of the time, people would get stuck. I don't know that that was napalm, but that's the only thing I can think of, because I used to see people that would get stuck in the middle of the road, and then I could see flames, and that's when my mother would turn me around, or my grandma would go, oh, mon Dieu, mon Dieu. And then, of course, we would disappear into these air raid shelters. At one point, I distinctly remember coming down the stairs. My mother was furious, because she came in to pick me up. I didn't have my shoes on, I didn't have my socks on. I didn't have any clothes on. My mother was absolutely livid. She was just raking my grandmother over the coals. You did this, and I told you not to do that. I can't take the little one naked across the street. You know, what is wrong with you? So besides the fact that there were bombs going off, then I hear my mother yelling and my grandmother going, mon Dieu, mon Dieu. So then finally I had my shoes on and she just put my coat on. And we start to go down the staircase, and there was this horrendous sound that sounded like it happened right outside the door. And when we got down into the lobby, the glass from the front doors had been blown out, and a lot of the pieces of glass, and I remember seeing this, they were stuck in the side of the wall when we got down. And then my grandmother was screaming. She's going, mon Dieu, the glass. Because if I would have just walked the way I normally would have, my face would have gotten cut up. But my mother saw, and she pulled me over, and she sort of picked me up, you know, very close to her. And when we got outside, it seemed like there were these little, almost like little bowls of fire on the road, and everything. It looked like there was like lightning going off everywhere. I just remember all of these sounds and all of these noises, and some lady was screaming and saying she was stuck and she was going to burn and somebody needed to help her. And of course nobody did, they all ran. So my mother took my grandma and said, here, take the little one, go in the air raid shelter, go to that spot where we always go and where we meet, where I said we need to meet if we get separated. I have to help this lady. So my grandmother and I would go down in there, and I didn't like it in there. It had a very strange, musty smell, and because sometimes we would be stuck in there for quite a while, so people, you know, there was no bathroom, so they would go in corners to relieve themselves, and of course some people would get so scared that they would just pee in their pants. And the smell of human excrement and perspiration, and you could literally, it was almost like you could cut the air with a knife. It was heavy with fear, you could tell. And of course there were a lot of people crying, and then the occasional rat would show up, and it was quite horrific. But I never really felt unsafe. I felt unsafe when I would hear the bombs and the sirens. That really scared me. But once my mother would take me and we would go down there, you know, I usually had my mom on one side, my grandma on the other, and they would huddle around me. So I always felt quite safe, except that it was so sad. I couldn't understand why everybody was crying. And then there were fights, which was also, you know, it was that fear. But this time, my grandma and I went down, and she had me sort of sitting on her lap. And then at one point, my mother came, and she was furious. She said, I've looked for you everywhere. You're not in the place where you're supposed to be. And I was terrified. I thought I'd lost both of you. So then those two, you know, unfortunately got into it. But I do remember this very distinct feeling of this fear around me. And then here was my little world that appeared to be okay, which was somewhat incongruous, but that's really how it felt. And I can't remember how long we would be in there, but it was quite a long time. And then, of course, when we would emerge and we'd come back out, there was always the question, oh, is the house still there, or is it all gone? And those 5 big apartment houses that my grandparents had, they actually were intact until the very, very end. And then I think it must have been a couple of months before the end of the war, we were evacuated. And so my grandma and my mother and I, we were sent, what the German government was doing, by that time they had so many homeless people and no place to put them, that any farmers that had any extra room, it could be a broom closet just about, as long as there was something where somebody could be under a roof in a house, they had to give up those rooms. So my grandma and my mother and I, we went to a tiny little farm town called Dinklage, and I remember this very well. It was a beautiful big farmhouse, and they had what I think must have been a pantry, because it had these shelves in it. There was nothing on it, but to me that must have been a pantry. So they put a single bed in there, was like a cot. And so then my mom and I would sleep in there one night, and my grandma would sleep on the floor, and then the next night grandma and I would sleep. And I told an earlier story about what it was like to go walk out in the country. It's called Butterbrot, where we would ask for food. Because now, you know, we had a place to sleep, but we still didn't have food. And this old couple that owned that farmhouse, they were very kind. And I remember them. They were very sweet. And once in a while they'd say, oh, come, we have a little bit of food you can eat with us today. So that was lovely. But basically, we, one day, and like I said, I talked about that in Butterbrot. My mom would go with me one day in one direction, beg for food. Next day, my grandma would go. So one day, my mother said, where's the little one? And my grandma said, well, I thought you had her with you. And my mother said, no, you were supposed to have her. Oh my God. So then the panic set in. So they talked to the old couple and they said, have you seen the little one? And they said, well, yeah, she was here earlier. And my husband took her when he went out to milk the cows, and he gave her a little cup of milk, but we haven't seen her since. So then there was total panic. So my mother and my grandmother went in different directions in this tiny little village, and they were asking everywhere, you know, have you seen our daughter? No. No, we haven't seen her. Then all of a sudden, some guy on a bicycle came by, and he stopped at my mom and he said, what are you doing? Why don't you have the little one? And she said, well, that's just it. We can't find her. We don't know where she is. And he said, well, I haven't seen her either, but you know, let me go around and ask. So he came back a little while later and he said, oh, you're not going to believe what she's doing. And my mother said, what? What is she doing? Is she okay? And he said, come here, come with me, jump on my bike. I'm going to take you. Because she wouldn't come with me. My mom, you saw her? And he said, yeah, just wait, because you have to see this. I don't want to do this. This is a surprise. I don't want to spoil the surprise. You are not going to believe what she's doing. So he took her to the train station, and then he said, okay, now this is where I'm leaving my bike. And my mother said, tell me, what is she doing? And he said, no, come with me. And she said, well, I don't understand this. And I am, you know, I really need to know. And he said, come on, come on. So he left his bike and he said, we're going to walk on the railroad tracks. And she said, why? And he said, well, guess what? That's where your little one is. She has a little stick. I don't know where she got it. And this little piece of fabric, she has have an apple in it. I don't know where she got it. I don't know how she made this little, she looks like a little miniature hobo. She has this little hanky with half an apple that somebody must have given her. And you know what she's doing? She's walking on the railroad tracks. She even knows the direction she needs to take. And when I ask her what she's doing, She said, ich gehe nach Pemen. I couldn't say Bremen. I called it Pemen. I told him that I was going to Bremen. And he said, well, why are you doing that? And apparently she likes it better there than out here, because she has her own bed there. So that's what she's doing. She's going to Pemen. But he said she would not go back with me. So he said, see, wait, he said, when we come around this curve, you'll see her. Because, I mean, how fast can she go? She's not running, she's walking. And she's having the best time. She's picking flowers along the way. She's putting them, you know, in there with her little apple. That's it. And my mother said, oh, you have got to be kidding. Are you sure it's her? And he said, are you kidding? We all know that little girl because she's smiling all the time and she's so sweet and she waves at us and she's always smiling. Yeah, we know. That's your daughter. So sure enough. So when my mom got there, she was just in tears. I mean, she could not stop hugging me. I couldn't figure out why, because I was going back to our beautiful apartment that I really liked. And I liked the neighbor lady. So there we were reunited. And I believe that it's the first time I ran away from home. Of course, some of you know that I really did a good job when I was 15, because I ran all the way from Pemen to London. And then I did it another time when I was 18, when most of you know I emigrated to the United States. So I do have that little, well, let me do what I want kind of thing in me. And some of you who have known me for a long time, yeah, that's about it. That's me. So anyway, I hope that you liked my story. Subscribe to my channel and you will be notified whenever we have a new one. And that's my story for today. Toodaloo! I love you!